Good morning. As we share today, the news in the last couple of weeks, and I mentioned this in dispatches, has changed quite dramatically, really, with the brutal killing of George Floyd in Minnesota, in the USA. George was a Salvation Army employee up to a couple of years ago, working at the Harbour Light Centre there in that city. And the Harbour Light Centre helped to support vulnerable people, those who'd come out of prison, drug addicts, those with alcohol addiction problems, the homeless, and so on. And George was known as the Gentle Giant. He was 6'6", but he was known as the Gentle Giant. And he worked security. And sometimes I understand that staff members, when they were leaving at night in what could be a dangerous downtown part of the city, he would see them safely to their car. To give them reassurance. And even after his employment had finished, he would often come back to visit and would sometimes volunteer at the Harbour Light Centre, which had a special place in his heart. So we have a special affinity there with George Floyd and the brutal killing, sadly, of this man. But sadly, the Christian church can't exactly cover itself in glory with its history. Its violent history going back over many centuries. Goes back to the Crusades, which were brutal as Christians tried to overcome those of other faiths, essentially, and in a very brutal way. I was reading about the peasants' revolt in our own area and how the Bishop Henry of Norwich, brutally destroyed this peasants' revolt and served no mercy. And the leader, a man called Lister from Felmingham, Geoffrey Lister, when he was captured, he was literally hung, drawn and quartered, which means his sort of body was cut into 4 pieces, and there was part taken to Great Yarmouth, part to King's Lynn, part left in North Walsham, where there'd been the Battle of North Walsham, and part to Norwich, as a sort of a warning to others. And that was led by the Bishop of Norwich. Horrendous when you think about it. And then after the Reformation and the Church of England became prominent in our country as the Church of the State, there was real hatred and persecution and violence and sometimes murder against those of the Roman Catholic persuasion. It's great that today we're all one, we're all part of churches together, but yet even within our own generation, things have changed a lot. What it was, 40, 50 years ago. And of course in Northern Ireland, one can still sort of know of echoes of that sort of hatred and that difference that there was between the Catholic community, the Republicans, and the Protestant community, or known as the Loyalists. And that could be very violent at times, and during the Troubles. And I remember during the Troubles in the 1980s, just a few months after the terrible Enniskillen Remembrance Day bombing by the IRA, I remember when we went to take meetings there in Northern Ireland, we went to visit Enniskillen, and there was Neville and Yvonne Andrews, who used to be at North Walsham. They were then the officers there, and we stayed with them for a night, and we visited this town and saw some of the destruction. This was about 4 months on, and then we saw the place where I think it was George Armstrong held his dying daughter in his arms, and he pleaded the words, "Forgive them, forgive them." And that need for forgiveness is the need that has to take foremost place, doesn't it? Who would have thought that some years later, arch enemies, I think of Jerry Armstrong and Martin McGuinness, and their arch enemy there, Dr. Ian Paisley, would form a power-sharing government. And there was that picture, I'll never forget it, on the news of seeing Martin McGuinness helping a frail Dr. Ian Paisley up the steps, I believe, of Stormont, putting his hand behind him, helping him up there. Wow, what a difference that has happened there. Incredible. And so as Christians, we have to learn to love one another, to accept one another. But we haven't had a good history in that respect. And of course, Jesus said, didn't he, love one another. A new commandment I give you, he said, love one another. And by this shall men know that you are my disciples. He said that in John's Gospel. I believe it's chapter 16. But when I think of the world as a whole, I also see much need for reconciliation, and hopefully some of the protests, there have been peaceful ones, but sadly there's also been non-peaceful protests. But hopefully there will be a lesson of reconciliation is a much better way than revenge and retribution. I've shared before how when I went to Bosnia, you saw all this systematic destruction, one community against another community, and they had to learn to live together and to work together. Retribution isn't good, revenge isn't good, but reconciliation is the way. And of course, the great leader of Zimbabwe, when he was elected president, Nelson Mandela, who had every reason to want revenge and want retribution, pleaded with his people to find reconciliation and to indeed become the rainbow nation, as he called them. Jesus spoke, didn't he, about our neighbours. He shared the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, the Samaritans were despised by the Jews because they were in many senses descendants and came from the northern tribes and were linked to the Jews, but they didn't keep rigidly to the laws of the Jews, and they were despised because of this. But Jesus told this story when he was asked, "Who is my neighbour?" of the Good Samaritan, and the Samaritan who was the one who actually helped a man who had been attacked. And then he was asked, "Who is my neighbour?" And of course, everyone is our neighbour. And we need to learn, don't we, to show love, acceptance to those around us. Who is our neighbour? We might sort of look at the world today and say, what difference can we really make in some of these places where there is conflict, where there is bitterness, where there is hatred? Well, perhaps we can just pray for those situations. But what we can do is make a difference just where we are. Last week was Volunteers Week, and when we were at Worcester Citadel, some of you may recall I had some articles in the Salvationist about some of the rough sleepers in Worcester, and I was intrigued to find out that during the lockdown, Worcester Citadel, which is based in the centre of Worcester, where there is many needs in this city, they have actually given out 10,000 meals, mainly to the homeless, but also to others in need in that community since lockdown. 10,000 meals, isn't that incredible? This week is National Carers Week, and we have thought, and we thank God for those who give their vocation to care for those. We think of those at First Hill under manager Jodie, who sadly has just lost her father from COVID, but who's helped to ensure that at First Hill they protect the residents from this horrible virus. And the staff there, we pray for them. And those who voluntarily give their time to care for their loved ones and become carers. This is National Carers Week. Yes, we can do our part just where we are. You know, the Rainbow Nation that Nelson Mandela spoke of is also a plea and a thought that we can share ourselves, can't we? That we accept everybody, warts and all, whoever they are, irrespective of their colour, their creed, their gender, even sexual orientation. All these things don't matter because we all stand before God together. And Eva Cassidy, the late Eva Cassidy, in a moment you're going to hear her sing that lovely song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And it speaks about the hope that we have, and the rainbow symbolises God's promise. One day that things will be better. One day that we can dream that these things will all come about. And we can hope and we can dream and we can pray. Martin Luther said in the 1950s, "I have a dream," and so much of that dream is still unfulfilled. Some of it perhaps is, but may we, as we listen to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, may we seek to do our part just where we are, without prejudice, without discrimination. God bless you.